So if you look at Islam in Egypt, Islam in Turkey, Islam in India, Islam in Indonesia and so forth, Islam in Senegal, you'll find the same aqidah, the same creed, the same worship, the same Quran, but you'll find differences of schools of law and jurisprudence. You'll find different institutional forms, you'll find different architectural forms, different musical forms. So you have, let's say, in India, the development of Qawwali music, which is it is a religious singing, but it expresses the sounds of India. Whereas the tawashih of Egypt, for example, sound very Egyptian. If you look at the religious songs in Turkey, they have the same music as the Gregorian chants of the Orthodox Greek. So there is something to the culture, but also something to the faith itself. Now, these things can happen by themselves. But that's like saying, you know, rice will grow by itself, flowers will grow by itself. But if you understand agriculture, you can create a garden. You can actually, you know, plant wheat instead of waiting until it grows wild. You can engineer these things to fast-track the process. And because we are in a society, and because of the perception of conflict, we need to engineer this process more rapidly. Because we are undergoing certain stresses in our society. Stresses between generations, stresses between communities, the need to integrate not only the immigrant community, the African American Muslim community, but we are also, we have Albanians, we have Turks, we have Indo-Pakistanis, we have Egyptians, you name it, we have varieties of Muslims. And what happens also in communities, if you study the history of progression of immigrants, of religious communities in this country, as I looked at the Jews and the Catholics, they tended to aggregate around ethnic communities. So that you had Polish synagogues, you had German synagogues, you had Hungarian synagogues. And I noticed when I first came to this country in 1965, we had really two mosques in New York. The third was the Black Muslim Mosque, which has now become a Sunni mosque as well. And we have over 130 mosques right now in the 5% city. But we were all of us were in one place. But after these 1970s, when a lot more immigrants came in, and in a critical mass, the Egyptians had their own mosque, the Bangladeshis had their own mosque, and I noticed all of that.
Do you think this is healthy? Is this something good that we should simply keep happening, or?
I think it's part of the sociological trajectory of communities as they emigrate. I think it's a natural process. But what this does create is that what I've noticed from the very beginning when I was here, a need for the younger community, the youth, who are struggling with their identities. Because I had an identity crisis. When I came to this country at the age of 17, I didn't know if I was Arab, English, Malay, and now going to be American in the process. And I know that most of you here, or many of you here, who are from one country, let's say, you may be both Pakistani, but your children are born here. They feel American. They feel more American than they feel Pakistani, or more American than they feel Egyptian, depending on what your ancestry is. And many of them don't particularly relate, or can't relate to an imam or to a religion which is culturally alien to their culture. So we have a need, for the sake of our children and grandchildren who will increasingly become American and American-centric, to have an understanding of Islam which integrates them into the broader society, and integrates Muslim to the broader society. You mentioned something, Brother Hassan, which was profound. You had a profound statement earlier this afternoon over lunch, when he said the prophets came to the community, not to just their followers. They came to their qawm, to their broader community. And their message was for the benefit of the broader community. And therefore we too have an obligation, this is a point I learned from Brother Hassan, to the broader American community. What are we doing for the sake of America? I was talking to a Jewish friend of mine 7-8 years ago, saying, what would have happened to America in 1948 when Israel was created? What would have happened to America if all the Jews in America left America and went to Israel? What would have happened to American film industry, American business, American education, you name it, American jurisprudence, American understanding of law, if all of them had left? The Jews are a very small number of people. Worldwide, there are only about 13 million. But they have the highest concentration of Nobel laureates among them. And they have contributed to society. What are we Muslims contributing to American society? I think that must be the demand that we make of ourselves.
I want to take this into a segue about from the integration of the American Muslim community in America, the contribution of the American Muslim community to the American society, the concept of the American Muslim culture, American Islam, that will lead into more integration, more influence, having a seat at the table. And what is this? There is a lot of fear, maybe, if you will, in the larger society about implementing our way of life now, influencing the American society with our way of life, or Sharia, or the fact that Islam by nature is of the type that it likes to introduce itself to others. So how do we address this internally within our community, externally, the fears, especially nowadays, about Sharia and implementing Islamic law and everything that you said about jurisprudence and law and music and arts? So that means Islam will permeate everything. And is this does this mean America is going to change and become an Islamic state? You know, what does that mean?
Well, I mean, if you look at societies throughout history, they've always changed. The notion that societies stay fixed is a myth. There are many myths that we have, and that people have, and even Muslims have myths. We think that, you know, the way we practice our religion, or our understanding of our religion, is the same as it was at the time of the Prophet. Not so. We call ourselves Muslims. Just to give you one example, the Prophet and his companions didn't think of themselves as Muslims. They thought of themselves as mu'mins, al-mu'minun. Not once does the Quran address the followers of the Prophet, Ya ayyuhalladhina aslamu, qul al-muslimin. There's always, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, qul al-mu'minin. And after the death of the Prophet, the Khalifa at the time of Umar was called Amir al-Mu'mineen. So there have been some significant, maybe small, but significant changes in how we think about ourselves. So we need to understand what do we mean by the terms we use, and realize that our identities are always shifting. Now we think of ourselves as Muslims, whereas before they thought of themselves as Mu'mins. There was no Pakistani identity 80 years ago. We have now national identities. People thought of themselves different. There's no Libya before World War II as such. And people were tribes. There were the Qaddaf tribe, where Qaddafi is from. There were the Wafra tribe or other tribes. There was no Saudi Arabia a century ago. There was Hijaz, there was Najd, there was different locations. So our identities are constantly shifting. And what it means to be American is constantly shifting. Maybe 100 years ago, people thought of Americans as being white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. Then we included the Catholics and the Jews. Then you have now a greater sense that African Americans, Latin Americans, you know, the ethnic identity is changing. And the cultural norms are changing. You know, what is Egyptian food, or what is American food? When I grew up in Malaysia, when I was in the 50s and early 60s, there was still some English people. There was the end of the colonial era. The English people used to have their servants would cook English food for them. And on Sundays they'd have a curry for lunch. Now I'm told in England, the national food of England is curry. Chicken tikka masala. Okay? And football games where, you know, in America they have beer and hot dogs, then they have beer and curry. It's now the national English food. Now, so our notions of identity and what is normative from food, from culture, from music is very important, and we have contributed. I mean, our African American brothers have contributed in the area of music, in sports. American sports is not what it is today, not for the African American community, and we have an increasing number of Muslims among them. Many of our, I mean, from the time I came to this country, some of the most important jazz musicians, like Ahmed Jamal and other, or Idris Muhammad, these are people who used to come to Islamic Center and we got to know, were Muslims. But we need to expand our contribution into the broader areas of society. So I see we have several fronts that we have to work on. We have to work within ourselves as American Muslims to develop ourselves in a coherent way. Know what our objectives, what do we mean by now developing an American Islam institutionally, jurisprudentially, culturally, so that we are seen as being American. Because now we're seen as being foreign. Now in the beginning, when Islam first went to Egypt and all this, they were foreign. But the Egyptian Muslims today don't think of Islam as an Arab religion, they think of it as an Egyptian religion. The Turks think of Islam as a Turkish religion. The Pakistanis think of Islam as a Pakistani religion. There's no Pakistan 80 years ago. Okay? Now Pakistanis think of it as a Pakistani religion. The Malays not only think of it as a Malay religion, it is the constitution of Malaysia that a Malay is a Muslim. So much so that when I was a young boy in Malaysia, if a Chinese became a Muslim, they would say he entered Malayness, masuk Melayu. Now they say masuk Islam. He entered Islam, but they would say he entered Malay. So we have to evolve ourselves here to a point where Islam is seen as an American religion. Number one. Which then segues into the issue of how we integrate as Muslims and how we engage with the broader American society. Now the third issue, which is very important, is because America is the sole global power today, American Muslims also have an interlocutory or intermediary role between this superpower and the whole Muslim world. So although we are a tiny number here, we are anywhere between 2 million to 15 million, depending on whom you're listening to, which is, you know, a very small percentage. We are, even at 15 million, that's about 5% of the population. And if it's 7 to 8 million, we're like 2.5–3% of the population. But the Muslims worldwide constitute almost 25% of the global population. And the reason why this is important is because this is the same thing which the American Catholics, the American Jews did before. The American Catholics were important in negotiating between America and the Vatican and the Catholic world. It was the Archbishop, the Catholic Archbishop, for example, of the Philippines, who played an important role in when the Filipino people didn't want Marcos, who was an American guy, to get him to retire to Hawaii and help transform the Philippines into a democracy. And then after that happened, they even, the Philippines asked the Americans to leave Subic Bay, a military base in the Philippines. Now when we see what's happening in the Arab-Muslim world, of people who desire democracy, we American Muslims have also an interlocutory role.
What is that role, Imam Feisal? What do you envision our role now as American Muslims with respect to especially what I think has been greatly expedited just in the last few months with all those revolutions, definitely in Egypt and Tunisia, and it seems in other places. What changed? What changed now in the Middle East that warrants us doing something, and what is that thing that we should be doing as American Muslims with respect to the changes happening in the Middle East?
Well, I mean, what we have to do is a number of things. We have to help America speak to the Muslim world.
But America is not interested in really listening to our voice. There isn't the trust level yet whereby we could be called on to speak to the Muslim world. We can even speak at some degree to America here, some would argue.
I would beg to differ with you on that. I believe that America actually does need does need to speak better to the Muslim world. They know they need to speak better to it.